My sense of it is that somebody lost control of an agent. He believed his own mythology, almost certainly. And, my sense of it is that somebody lost control of a monster.
Eric Weinstein recently went on Piers Morgan's show to share his experiences after meeting Jeffrey Epstein. What were some of the most striking parts of his personality, and whether he buys the government narrative regarding Epstein and his death, and what we can take away from that saga today. So let's see what he has to say. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I mean, you met Epstein. I never met him. I met Ghislaine Maxwell briefly at a book launch once and had no inkling of the stuff that was going on. But when you met him, was he weird? Was he unusual, or was he just a good actor? Was he able to come across in a perfectly normal manner?
If you've seen any of my interviews, it was one of the most bizarre interactions I've ever had. I will remember it, for the rest of my life as being terrifying. This is not you didn't sit down with him and think, wow, what a great guy. You thought, holy cow, this is the weirdest doorway into an alternate reality. And, in particular, he was absolutely more interested in my science than he was in anything I was doing with hedge funds and risk management, which is how nominally I came to be in his orbit. He was very connected to a major, book agent. He was funding all sorts of scientists. He was obsessed by gravity. He knew things about my work that were essentially known to no one. He was very connected through at least one Harvard mathematician who I think became a dean of some kind at Harvard University. So he was connected to my graduate department. I never heard his name while I was there. And I was not only there until 1992, I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts at MIT, so in the same ecosystem for years after that. Then I came back to Harvard. He was a very strange object, and the connection between Ghislaine's father, who really had an enormous impact on scientific publishing and had the ability to sort of look at all science before it's published because of peer review. He ran Pergamon Press. There is no question that there is some transmission that is likely between Robert Maxwell of Pergamon Press and Jeffrey Epstein's science obsession, particularly with gravity.
And maybe his experience in dabbling with the intelligence services of people that he surrounded himself with throughout his entire life. Many people connected to Mossad, of course. We know that from his friendship with Ehud Barak and Robert Maxwell, who served as maybe the most prominent Israeli spy ever. Likely a Mossad asset. Almost certainly, it's been widely publicized that he was given a special state funeral, essentially, buried in the Mount of Olives, attended by major prime ministers of Israel, etc. But there's a lot of things that Brett said here that were striking. A lot of people do say similar things about Epstein that have met him, that, you didn't come away with thinking he was such a great guy, but that he was kind of mercurial and odd in some respects. But back then, when they interviewed a lot of people about Epstein, they didn't have the same things to say. And another thing that struck me that he talked about regarding Epstein is how he said that Epstein was much more interested in Weinstein's scientific knowledge or scientific endeavors than he was anything that he was dealing with in regard to money or financial transactions and things like that. And that kind of checks out too, because the mainstream narrative is that, Epstein was a money manager, and he served as a money manager for Les Wexner. And that's about it, by the way. Supposedly he wouldn't take clients that didn't have $1 billion to invest with him. But there's no real evidence he even did that for Wexner, though he did exercise a lot of control over Wexner's companies and was given elaborate wealth and property from Wexner for basically no reason. So a lot of things interesting in Weinstein's response here.
Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. In terms of the alleged crimes that Epstein was accused of committing, how guilty do you think he was likely to have been? In other words, are we talking a small-time abuser, a gigantic serial abuser? What's your gut feeling about that side of him?
My sense of it is that somebody lost control of an agent, and that this person, was supplied with an enormous, backstories are typically called legends, I believe, in tradecraft.
Yeah.
So he was a mythical creature who was supposedly so intelligent that, he could discern, the slightest tremor in the markets, et cetera, et cetera. He believed his own mythology, almost certainly. And, my sense of it is that somebody lost control of a monster, and that the actor that they hired to play this was not well in the head. Now, that's my gut feeling. The other thing that really concerns me is people are bad at conspiracy theory. We have a tremendous amount of background data on what conspiracy theories look like. There's a precedent before Epstein called Craig Spence that we almost never hear about. I don't know if that's something you know about, Pierce, but
no.
So this is not the first operation of its kind, and I think it's very important to recognize that once somebody set this thing up at great expense, imagine that this is a 9-figure fortune that was beaten into, gold beaten into gold foil to look like a 12-figure fortune or something remarkable. So he was acting rich in a way that even rich people don't act rich. And he was acting smart in a way that smart people don't act smart. So the whole thing was likely having a bunch of different activities funneled through it. So, for example, he seemed to be giving tax advice that would also potentially entrap people in ways that the IRS could get them potentially.
Yeah, Leon Black specifically gave him $150 million with kind of the justification that, hey, Epstein did his taxes. Leon Black, a really rich individual. He owned an investment bank and owned, one of the wealthiest art museums in the country. He was an art connoisseur, and he was involved in criminal activities too. There were some lawsuits against him saying that, Epstein had essentially trafficked some victims to him, and some of those suits were dropped. But yeah, Epstein was for sure a megalomaniac. He was obsessed with his own power. He lived like it. He lived to control others, and he clearly practiced a blackmail operation under the guise of some sort of connection to intelligence at some point. Whether or not you think that he was a Mossad asset or a CIA agent or whatever, he sure did have so many interactions from his very youth with people from all sorts of intelligence services throughout his life, whether it be Donald Barr. He was part of the OSS. Barr hired him to teach at Dalton. He got involved with arms traffickers like Adnan Khashoggi and Douglas Leese in the 1980s, and you don't really hear that much about that very much anymore. Ehud Barak was a close friend and confidant with him, even hung out with him 30 plus times, stayed with him in his Manhattan apartment after his first conviction for child abuse and child sex abuses. And he had a relationship with Robert Maxwell, again, a Mossad asset who was Israel's most famous and prominent spy. So he did live a lavish lifestyle, but around, people in the intelligence communities. And this is why people still want answers about those things.
That was something that he was giving away. He was also, my guess is, providing non-pedophile sexual opportunities with young women who were over the age of 18, because I think his real product was silence. And I think people don't get that sex is readily available. Sex is always embarrassing, but I think that the key issue is that Epstein was able to guarantee silence when no one else could guarantee silence, and that's why people came to him.
Yeah, I think that's actually right. What the strategy is called is playing the box, and it involves blackmail, but what it really means, and this is how Epstein thrived from his time at Bear Stearns forward. It wasn't even before that the most widely documented cases of sex trafficking and sexual abuse were documented with him. Playing the box involved committing crimes, but in the process of committing those crimes, you make things so embarrassing for the people around you that they're not going to prosecute you. They're not going to come forward and, spill the beans to the authorities, etc. And that's the way that Epstein operated his entire life. That's why so many people, believe, based on what we have evidence, even in the search records, we have evidence that a safe was taken with printed media that said prominent people's names on those discs. were blackmail, and that he may have accumulated enormous amounts of his wealth through blackmail transactions. Hey, I had this dirt on you. I demand this much money. Otherwise, this is going to get out there. So that's where we're at. We don't have all the answers, but we certainly have a lot of circumstantial pieces of evidence and a lot of missing gaps regarding his wealth to explain that could have been how he became a billionaire. And I know it wasn't reported that he died a billionaire. He apparently died with only about $600 million, but at points he was documented to have been a billionaire. So,
and I also think that there's something about the way in which people have to agree to be compromised in some sense to enter the elite, because otherwise you're not considered trustworthy. So you have to surrender something so that there's a kill switch on you. And I think that he in part specialized in installing the kill switch.
How do you think he died? Do you think he did kill himself, or are you at the very least, not oblivious to the theory that maybe it was more nefarious, that somebody arranged it?
Why do you believe that he's dead? Why do you believe that he killed himself? I certainly don't think that he experienced shame the way normal people did. So I think the idea that he was so embarrassed that he took his own life is probably the only thing I feel I have anything to add. But let me just caution your listeners. All of this fun that people have with conspiracy theories is absolutely deadly when it comes to actually getting justice. And calling this pedophile island and Lolita Express and talking about Epstein didn't kill himself as a joke, like any of you know, none of you know. And, if you were serious about this, and you as a parent, just let me specialize to all the moms and dads out there. If you're serious as a parent of wanting this sort of thing absolutely excised from our society, don't go after the children, don't go after the memes. Focus on one issue alone. Why will the press not report on the multi-billion-dollar foreign currency hedge fund, which even if it has dummy compliance, I guarantee you any forensic accountant could determine whether this thing was real or fake. And my guess is that there are no former employees employed from the yeshivas of Brooklyn. This thing, I think, is a will-o'-the-wisp. It's a figment of our imagination, and it's a product of statecraft. And the fact that we have very long-standing relationships with our major news organs, that they agree to have liaisons to the covert operations group so that we don't constantly report. This is an issue called deconfliction. Many people don't know that word. This is a situation which escaped our deconfliction systems almost certainly, and it has the hallmark and the outline. The person you should have on, not me, is the person who is an expert in all of the legal aspects of having a free society with covert operations group. And in particular, there's a case of something like Al-Masiri versus Tenet, which establishes that when somebody has a legitimate case in the courts and their state secret privilege, that person may not be entitled to exculpatory evidence and information, that state secrets trump justice. And I think it's absolutely imperative that you have a lawyer on who's competent to talk about this so this doesn't enter into the realm of conspiracy theory.
Okay, so there's problems with just castigating and rebuking the thought of conspiracy theories for the sake of rebuking conspiracy theories. I'd like to hear from Weinstein about what he thinks is consistent or inconsistent with the government narrative. It's not helpful to just call this a conspiracy theory or things related to Epstein a conspiracy theory without explaining your position. And that's how so many people dispose of some of these issues. I think he only partially addressed it here. Yeah, I have a problem with how victims' rights were violated in this, but we still need answers about Epstein's past, whether it was the money trail, whether it was his connections to potential intelligence services, etc. He's right about the fact that we need to look into, Epstein's past, his financials, and the money movement aspects. I don't even think Les Wexner has ever been interviewed, not only by the Department of Justice or the FBI, but also by many journalists. He's essentially living in a cave, and this guy gave, hundreds of millions of dollars to Epstein in property and money, and essentially let him run his companies to some extent, to the extent that some of his previous executives were essentially pushed out of the mix. So, yeah, I don't really like Eric's response here very much because it kind of deflects from what Pierce is asking. Did you have any problems with the narrative, or how do you think he killed himself? Well, he doesn't answer that question. He just points to the problem of conspiracy theorists and you need a lawyer to sort that out. You don't have to be a lawyer to talk about this case or look about what's happened in it. So I think that there's kind of an evasive answer.
I'm going to decline to speculate.
Fascinating. Elon Musk fell out spectacularly with Donald Trump and posted on X in a bombshell, Trump's in the Epstein files. I know you're very close with Peter Thiel, Elon's old boss. What do you make of what's happened there?
You have, how do I put this? It would appear that Elon is very disappointed that we are not radical enough to understand the threat to the country. He has a very clear idea about what has to be surmounted. He, I believe, then apologized for that, which I found interesting.
You shouldn't apologize for that.
Much the way, Amy Robach had the famous hot mic incident and then said, oh, that was nothing. Something in these files, something in this situation causes people to reverse course. And I think that what you have to assume is that the public will never, ever, ever let this go, and that there is some equal and opposite pressure which says that the elite will do absolutely anything to keep it secret. And by elite, I don't mean people who are actually elite. I mean people who are in the chairs that should be reserved for the elite but have a lot to lose.
Yeah, I think I generally agree with them on the last part. There seems to be a bipartisan mentality in general toward this case, whether it was the Biden administration, whether it was a Trump administration, that crosses political boundaries. They're both behaving essentially the same way. Is when they're in office, they're saying like, hey, there's nothing there. There wasn't that much pressure from the Democrats to get anything released under Biden, but right-wing populists sure talked about this. Dan Bongino talked about this. Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, talked about this. Pam Bondi talked about this, how Biden wasn't being forthcoming. And yeah, there was an aura of secrecy revolving around this case from the start, and too many glaring inconsistencies that just you couldn't hold over the American public and expect them to accept it. No one could accept it. And you're still seeing that now. You're seeing Trump behave in that same way after he was purported to be the white knight to drive into Washington and deliver answers to the public. But Eric's right. There's something in those files that are causing the same people in the deep state, in the elite, in the presidential administrations to behave the same way. And I think the most plausible reason is the connections to intelligence. Actually, at one point during this investigation, weeks ago, Pam Bondi was questioned, are there going to be any redactions or anything like that? And she said, and this was widely covered at the time, that there might be some redactions, but if there are, it will be for national security concerns. Well, why would there be national security concerns about sex trafficking operations unless it involved foreign influences or foreign intelligence? That's yet another reason why so many people think that Epstein had intelligence connections. And again, the most plausible to me is Mossad. He surrounded himself with very prominent people from Mossad, including the former Mossad chief who stayed at his house in prolonged periods of time, and obvious relations to Robert Maxwell, the most prominent spy in Israeli history. So yeah, Weinstein's right about that. There's something in these files, and it won't go away until the government's completely forthcoming about it. But they can't be forthcoming about it if it compromises their rule and control over us, and that's what I really suspect. And that's the harsh reality in which we live. If it's that something that would embarrass the U.S.-Israeli relationship, you can guarantee it will never come out because Trump is too owned by the Israel lobby. He's too close to AIPAC, too close to Miriam Adelson. He boasts about how pro-Israel he is. He moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, which was a huge Zionist cause that precludes in some ways some potential possibility for any potential of a Palestinian state because they want part of Eastern Jerusalem for that. He signed the Abraham Accords, even though his own DHS said it was a bad idea. It would inflame tensions in the region. And he wants Netanyahu to be charges of fraud and corruption to be dismissed against him. So in every regard, Trump has not only signaled, but lived the life of someone in office who's close to Israel. Bankrolling the genocide in Gaza too, and abandoning U.S. foreign policy aims to normalize relations with Iran for the sake of bombing Iran and placing regime change on the table. So that's where we're at. I think his answer at the end was good. I don't believe that the right response to this whole thing is just to say, you know, there's too much conspiracy theory here and only lawyers can sort it out, which might be a unfair reading of his answer to that question. But to me, it's just very dismissive. Like, you can research this case, pick up information about it, you know, select information you think is particularly concerning or would yield more answers in it, and address that, or address problems with the government narrative, because there are plenty in this case, as we all know. But what do you think? Do you think Eric Weinstein is correct about Jeffrey Epstein? Do you think that he had a good assessment of Epstein's personality, knowing what you do about Epstein? And what is the most missing angle of this entire case? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, subscribe to Pierce too. He has great guests and, you know, fun Jerry Springer-like atmosphere when it comes to the debates sometimes too. And please consider becoming a YouTube member of me. If you click the join button below, you can help support the channel and get access to all my videos before they go live on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.